introduce our good friend now. We see him as Watch Democracy Grow as a friend of democracy, as a friend of the organization, in Ambassador Salah S. Ahmad. Mary, if you would.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, and thank you so much, distinguished guests. Our last speaker is actually a fill-in for our representative to Sudan, who couldn't make it because of the lockdown right now where they are operating. So the next speaker we have is the former Rwandan ambassador to India, the former Army Chief of Staff for Rwanda, and Ambassador Kayumba holds a bachelor's degree in laws, a master's in global security. And without ado, Ambassador Kayumba, the floor is yours. And we are glad that we have African Union aboard. And Ambassador Salah is going to do the closing remark for the day. Thank you. And I'm going to cite the case study on human rights issues on the continent for us, and the case study is going to be Rwanda.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mary. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir.
Thank you so much. First of all, I must thank Watch Democracy Grow Now for inviting me for participation and for presentation. I therefore thank my good sister, my very good friend, Mary Uwera, with whom we have shared a lot and we share a country. And I thank the facilitator, Gregory. He has been very, very inspiring in facilitating this program. And of course, the participants, the panelists, and the participants. It's a great pleasure talking to you today. The topic today is about strong institutions, good governance, and human rights. Lieutenant Colonel Terry talked about dictatorship. Today, I'll talk about totalitarianism, because totalitarianism is a higher form of oppression than a dictatorship. Our friend Mujera from BBC talked about what BBC has been doing, mainly in the countries of West Africa. He talked about Nigeria, he talked about Cameroon. But I must state here, and if Mujera is listening, BBC is banned in Rwanda. BBC does not operate in Rwanda. For the last 6-7 years or so, BBC is banned in Rwanda. And possibly on the next segment, anybody from BBC possibly should be able to talk about how the media is treated in Africa, and possibly Rwanda would be.
Just to clarify, BBC Great Lakes, yeah? BBC Great Lakes is banned in Rwanda, you're right. Absolutely.
BBC Great Lakes is banned in Rwanda. In any case, Rwanda is based in the Great Lakes. And in any case, that is a Kinyarwanda program, which most of the people listen to. However, since today I'm supposed to give a case study, and the case study is about human rights, I'll talk about generally the fundamental human rights, the right to life, the right to dignity, the right of choice, expression, and association. And I try to highlight those in the context of Rwanda. First of all, Rwanda is touted as a country that's developing. But development cannot be in abstract or in a vacuum. Development must be tied to the people. But what happens in Rwanda is that the right to life is violated, constantly violated. you must have heard recently of the assassination of a gospel singer who was picked by the police called Kizito Mihigo. This man was a genocide survivor. And he sang music, he was composing music, mainly for national reconciliation. But there's always a narrative in Rwanda that is put out by the state, and you must go by the narrative. His was a narrative that was encompassing of all ethnicities in Rwanda. And this man was picked, and what you heard was that he hanged himself in prison using bed sheets. And definitely, prisoners in Rwanda don't have bed sheets. So, of course, that was a lie. And since today, no investigation has been carried out. The recent case is the case of one humanitarian, a man who saved a lot of Tutsis. And the guy is a Hutu. The Rwandan genocide mainly was perpetrated and carried out by the Hutus. Now, this man called Paul Rusesabagina decided against all odds, against his own ethnicity, and saved over 1,000 Tutsis. And he was yet that by his own brethren. Recently, this man was picked from Dubai through an extraordinary rendition and taken to Rwanda, and is being paraded in a kangaroo court. How come in the 21st century that you can see a country involved in extraordinary rendition of people who are exposed to the regime? This is extraordinary. And if you are going to talk about human rights violation, this is where we should be able to concentrate. I don't hear Nigerians or even Cameroonians abducting people from wherever. But in Rwanda, we have had citizens being harassed in Australia, in the United Kingdom, assassinated in Kenya, where our friend Mujera worked. We had a minister killed in Nairobi. We had a prosecutor abducted from Nairobi. We have had killings in South Africa. We have had killings in Mozambique. And this is very clear that whatever we are going to do, we must not be duped. Because what is put out there is that the regime in Kigali is a developmental state. And even that one is a fallacy. It is a fallacy because the statistics that are put out there by the regime are normally forged. And the World Bank has said so, that the statistics are forged. Those of you who are familiar with the region, there's no way you can ever claim that Rwanda develops more than Kenya or Tanzania. It's not possible, because you have to look at the indicators that could be able to underpin development. That's not possible. But what will they tell you? They tell you they have got a clean city without beggars. The presumption is that all Rwandese are so rich and you can't have a beggar in Kigali. Yet you can have a big slum in Nairobi called Kibera. And when you look at the economies of those countries, it's a very big disparity. Then they will tell you it's because Rwanda is very well managed by an incorruptible leader. Yet I can be able to tell you, and with facts, that President Kagame owns 4 presidential jets. Imagine 4. President Uhuru has one, Magufuli has one, Museveni has one, Burundi has one, yet Rwanda, the president has 4. One for himself, another one for his wife and his daughter, another one for his sons, another one for reserve. And this is out there for anybody to see. I can always be even send you the numbers for these aircraft. And one of them was used to abduct Rusesabagina from Dubai. One of those aircraft with the presidential jets was the one which was used to abduct Rusesabagina. So if we are going to talk about corruption and a leader of a country whose GDP is $8 billion a year, and you can't say there's corruption, so what is corruption? Another thing is you have aid funds being siphoned out of the country and put in Panama. You can look at the Panama Papers. And recently, there was a publication from the World Bank where the government of Rwanda took away funds, $190 million, and put in a foreign account. And yet you go out, you go and ask money from the World Bank, from the IMF to fight COVID. Why don't you bring back the 190 million that is sitting in a bank somewhere? And that money can be traced because it is clearly stated that this is money that was stolen. So what do we have in Rwanda? What we have in Rwanda is assassinations and disappearances of the opposition parties and opposition members. Most people in the opposition are either forcefully disappeared or are arbitrarily imprisoned, therefore violating the principle, human rights principle of freedom to associate and freedom to dignity. And then what else do we have? What we have in Rwanda, and we're talking about strong institutions, is whereby you have a leader who allocates himself 99% in national elections. And we are told the AU is here, we are promoting good governance. How do you promote good governance in a country where a leader allocates himself 99% of the elections? That's not possible. Possible even Jesus Christ, if he came back, he wouldn't get those numbers. And then you change the constitution. Rwanda had a constitution, and within the constitution, there was a clause 104 that indicated that under no circumstances should the constitution of Rwanda be changed to allow a president to stand for 2 consecutive terms. And the consecutive terms in Rwanda were actually wrong terms because they were 7 years each, while in other countries could be 5, but Rwanda had 7. And Kagame had been in power since 1993. Then 2010 becomes president. Then 2003 goes for elections. He steals elections and gives himself 95%. 2010, he gives himself 93%. Then 2015, he changes the constitution. And then 2017, he gives himself 99%. Now, there is no way, therefore, we can talk about democracy, strong institutions, the rule of law, when actually all tenets of democracy are being stifled. They are being stifled because when you have got 99% for one person, it means there is no opposition in the country. So there is no alternative voice. And what do you have? Eventually what you have is a totalitarian state. It's a totalitarian state. Lieutenant Colonel Terry was talking about a dictatorship. But in Rwanda, what we have then is a totalitarian state because the parliament becomes a rubber stamp. The judiciary gets orders from the government who should be charged and what the sentence should be. For example, in the case of Rusesabagina, legally, he should have challenged the government of Rwanda, particularly on procedure. The procedure is, how did he get to Rwanda? You know very well in Britain, there is the case of the colonel, the Libyan colonel Berhaji, who was abducted from Malaysia, I think, and taken to Libya. Eventually, he brought a case against the British government, and particularly against Jack Straw. The man eventually won the case. His wife, who had been abducted with him, was compensated, and the British government asked for forgiveness and gave an apology. But in Rwanda, Rusesabagina is being tried, having been abducted from Dubai, and the judiciary in Rwanda accepts to try a person who has been brought to it illegally. How does the judiciary accept to try a person who has been brought to court illegally? And the world keeps quiet. The African Union don't want to listen. or even say this is not correct. What should have happened in 2017? Because Article 25 of good governance in the African Union indicates that there shouldn't be any change of constitution to allow leaders to stand for more terms other than those articulated in the constitution. And yet they could allow the government and particularly Paul Kagame to change the constitution and stand again. And he is going to stand again until 2034. And there is nothing that stops him, even now, to change the constitution so that he can stand for life. Now, how then do you talk about liberty? How do you talk about freedom of the judiciary? How do you talk about freedom of the legislature when everything is in the hands of one person? And normally people express their views through various ways. One of them is through the judiciary. If you have got the courtesy to close BBC Great Lakes region, tell me how easy it is to close a media house in Rwanda that belongs to the Rwandans. If the BBC cannot even resist, how do you expect a Rwandan normal journalist to resist when his newspaper or when he's thrown in jail? All the journalists who reported how the COVID funds that were given to Rwanda, how they were misused, all those who reported about the misuse are all now in prison, incarcerated, and nobody's talking for them. So what remains therefore is a populist government and a populist leader. And how does he do it? By paying handsomely to lobbyists in Britain, in America, and all various countries. That you can always check. Rwanda has the biggest number and the most expensive lobbyists to cleanse the name of a person who kills, imprisons, extradites his citizens, and he has to be cleansed. Number 3 is international relations. Look at the relationship between Rwanda and Congo. Look at the relationship between Rwanda and Burundi. Look at the relationship between Rwanda and Uganda. Certainly, the Congolese leadership can't be wrong. The Burundian leadership can't be wrong. The Ugandan leadership can't be wrong. And Paul Kagame is right. That's not possible. And every other day, Rwanda is at war with almost all its neighbors. In a country where our friend Mugera comes from, in around, I think, 1999 and 2000, the embassy, the one embassy in Kenya was closed and diplomatic ties were closed. In 2014, diplomats from Rwanda and South Africa were expelled, were involved in assassination attempts and the assassinations against my friend Patrick Karegeya. Now, therefore, also Kenya can't be wrong, and South Africa can't be wrong. Diplomats have been expelled from Canada, from Sweden, from America, mainly for spying and harassing refugees in those countries. Now, therefore, to cut a long story short, what I wanted to present, since today we're talking about good governance, strong institutions, and human rights. What I'm trying to say is, for Africa to prosper, it's quite important that Africans should be clear and frank with their neighbors. You cannot sit in the African Union and somebody is being abducted from Dubai, taken to Rwanda, and you keep quiet, and tomorrow you give a platform and you say this is the greatest leader. That's not the right thing to do. There should be a way of how we should be able to call up some of those people to adhere to the rule of law. That's number 1. So the African Union should advance democracy, should advance liberty and freedom for African people. We cannot talk about colonialism like I have had in the presentation. Before I talk about how African leaders, and particularly in Rwanda, our people are colonized by their own. You cannot have fought against colonialism and then you are going to be oppressed by your own people. It does not make sense. Number two is institutions of government, particularly the judiciary and the legislature. As long as the judiciary and the legislature are compromised or are in the hands of one individual, people have nowhere to go. Where they will go, they'll be running away to exile because there is nobody to talk for them. So when you talk about people you see drowning in the Mediterranean, it's simply because institutions of government cannot talk for them. And what they do is that they have to run away. They run away because they are oppressed, and they run away because they cannot be able to voice whatever they want to do. Rwanda now has the biggest refugee population in the whole of the East African region. How is it possible? Look at our population, look at the population of Uganda, the population of Tanzania or Kenya. How is it possible that Rwandans are now running out of their country at this material time? And you don't find it in other countries, maybe with the exception of Congo. And the Congo is a special case, but Rwanda also is one of the countries that has a lot of refugees running the neighboring countries. And therefore you cannot talk about stability, you cannot talk about the development, you cannot talk about a clean city when your own citizens are running out to exile. In a nutshell, and to conclude, I would think that to have democracy grow, particularly in Africa, is to look at a case-by-case basis. I'm glad our colleague Mujela talked about Cameroon, talked about Nigeria, but there are other countries that go under the radar. They hide under the radar simply because they can pay lobbyists and nobody talks, or they can intimidate. And those are actually the worst places. At least what is taking place in Nigeria, like Mujera was saying, they can have people to go and investigate, but you cannot go to investigate anything in Rwanda. And that's a problem. So it's quite important we don't just allow deceit to blind the eyes of our people, and particularly the human rights activists. They should go out and speak actively and openly to make sure that we see people who cannot be talk for themselves, at least have people who can talk for them. And to conclude, I thank Watch Democracy Grow Now, because you can provide this kind of platform. I speak to you now because I'm out of Rwanda. What I'm saying now, I can't say in Rwanda. And possibly, if this was to be found out, possibly somebody's going to be accused of giving me a platform. Like you could have seen recently, when Christian Amanpour gave a platform to one journalist talk about Paul Rusesabagina, immediately the government of Rwanda was out to attack Christian Amanpour. All she did was only to give a platform for somebody to express a view, and yet she was attacked. So I would encourage the activists, the media practitioners to look at the case of Rwanda and highlight it in its proper form instead of being duped by a clean city and by lobbyists. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.